Good morning and welcome to a new edition of the Discord discussions. Got a little shorter panel today. It's just fly optometrist ML and myself, and the topic of the day is hope. I think it's a thing in our society that we have lost a grasp of because there's a lot of evidence that people don't have any hope, and with that lack of hope, which will I'm sure get into the topic of some level of religion, some level of belief, some level of spiritualism. Because hope, you know, I was talking to a client yesterday at my office, and he had an interesting conversation around this, and he goes, "There's only like four potentialities of belief, right? So God's real, to down to God's not real, right? So then there's the two options of if you live, if you follow the religion, have hope, etc., you go to heaven, or you could be reincarnated. Some people believe that. So there's hope in the reincarnation that there's more to this. Then there's the converse of, well, if there is a God, etc., right? And you don't believe that, and you live your life, you'll go to hell. That's really a negative outcome. And then there's the fourth one, which would be, yeah, nothing happens. You die, and that's just it. So,
It's
and
Pascal's wager.
yeah, that's I couldn't remember the guy's name. It was Pascal.
That argument is, first
Forever.
coined by Blaise Pascal, who was a French mathematician in, I think, the 16th century. Yeah.
Hmm. It's been around for a hot minute, so it's just no.
Oh, it's one of the, if you do any kind of debating, like, does God exist versus not existing, it's one of the first arguments you will write. It's a classic. Yeah, literally a classic. It's hundreds of years old.
Yep. But and the reason I bring it up is because I think, and me and ML were talking about this earlier, is that there's a vacuum when hope is gone, and that gets filled by something. So I'd like to discuss today, in the context of hope, is what created this vacuum, and then how do we fill it, right? And I think hope is the thing we want to put in that vacuum, and not despair, not misery, not anarchy, not you know all the negatives are the opposite of hope. Um, so I'm gonna get each of you kind of give me your thoughts on just a generalized hope concept. So, Fly, I'll start with you, and then
Okay. All right. Well, they had this. I think it's about Napoleon. He said that hope is a dealer in. I mean, a leader is a dealer in hope. Have you guys ever heard it before?
no,
I've I've heard the expression. I just didn't know it was attributed to him.
yeah,
Hope is it's a thought of an individual to me that things will turn out on the good end of the situation or whatever the situation it may be. And when you think of when Napoleon said a dealer, I mean a leader is a dealer in hope. You have to give people something to believe in. Um, you have to show people that they're making a meaningful contribution to what the ordeal is, and you have to be a human inspiration machine to a person or to a group of people. And so when you think like that, a leader is a dealer in hope, and hope that we hope that tomorrow will come, right? We we hope that the next 24 hours that we'll be still in good shape and in good health. So when you think about it, hope is things that's unseen. It's almost like faith, almost.
okay.
The,
That seems like a reasonable assessment. The hope is, I think hope has a faith component.
I don't know. I mean, fundamentally, I guess. I think at some fundamental level there is. I know for myself, I realized at some point a few years ago that it was ultimately up to me how I choose to interpret and frame the phenomena of my reality, and that there is no there's no answer book with which to check. So it's what we were talking about last week. It's an element of freedom. It's complete freedom, and freedom from any way of assessing whether or not you've chosen correctly, except by virtue of testing it with reality and yourself. And at some point, I realized that, if, especially from an atheistic view, if meaning is if the universe is devoid of innate meaning, and if nothing matters and we're all going to die, then why not why not um, assemble a frame and a worldview that is positive and that makes you happy while still being while not being delusional, while still being congruent with the facts. If if you can do so without any penalty to accuracy, then why would you choose, like, because so at that point I realized, at least for myself, that choosing the inverse of that, choosing to be cynical, to be sarcastic, to be pessimistic, just as a default setting to not be hopeful, is to set yourself up for a pretty dour life, a life of misery and kind of joylessness. Um and it just, I suddenly realized, like, I'd always, before, I had thought that, like, people who went on about the power of positive thinking and hope and this and that, I always found them cloying and overly sentimental and a bit naive. But I suddenly realized, I was like, but like, for the most part, none of them have any, like, beliefs about reality that I disagree with. They're not delusional. They just see, like, well, we can't know the future for certain, especially the longer time frame you go out. So why not assume that it's going to have good outcomes, especially given, like, recently a lot of our psychology has shown, like, with patient outcomes, like cancer surviving outcomes, um, have a lot to do with the mentality of the person who has the cancer. So if the person who has the cancer is very depressed and very dour and doesn't have a
Hope.
supportive social circle of friends and family, the chances of them having a positive outcome are much lower than the same person with the same cancer who has a happier outlook, who maintains a positive frame and has a supportive, positive circle of friends and family. So that's not it's not a genetics thing. It's strictly, it really does. It's like that, the movie Patch Adams. Like, laughter is the best medicine.
So
It's
hold
not
on a
the
minute.
best medicine, but it is a medicine.
So let me
I'll
ask
stop
this
it.
question. So, and as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking that, you were framing it in a quite positive manner, right? And using personal experience, but
Well, I
I
was trying
was
to frame it in a logical manner.
right.
Like,
So
logically, it
right,
just
but
makes
hold on.
sense to be positive.
So when in almost every movie, like the bad guy who's oppressing a group of people, and especially it was like I think it was an Ant's Life where they had made the comment, right, and he's like, if you give them any hope, a sliver, they'll usurp us, and that's the same thing with prisoners, with any group of people that once they just get a crack of light that shows into their misery, the inspiration of it, the willingness for people to want more, it's uncanny how hard people will drive towards that hope of survival, of making it, of not dying. So,
Well, it's a great motivator. Yeah, hope is a very good motivator.
so the question is, right, without hope, you see in our newer, younger generation who is not religious at all for the most part, right? They are going to, or they have exhibited the potentiality in their behavior of doing all the negative things because there's nothing past now. So there's no hope for a future for them. So fuck it, I'm going to live however I want to, do whatever I want.
Or they're like Greta Thunberg, where because they think that they have no future, because they think that the world's biosphere is going to collapse in 20 years and we're all going to literally die in 20 years, they are like out of their minds screaming crazy.
But it could be that they have lost confidence in the future.
Well, I mean, to Greta Thunberg and all her ilk, I would say you have lost confidence in the adaptiveness of the human animal. I mean, you don't understand that all of your models, at least all the ones I'm aware of, that are making these predictions for upwards of 50 years out, all of those models have, like, none of them account for human reactivity to the problem. So none of these models account for the inventions that we're going to come up with and already are coming up with
solve a problem.
like, well, yeah, to burn cleaner coal, for example, like just to like better renewables. So like we were using like first and second generation solar panel and wind farm technology and that sort of thing. We're getting into like the third and fourth and fifth generation now, where we're getting the kinks ironed out and shit's starting to get real good. It's none of their models take that into account. All of their models, again, as
Have
far
no
as I
hope.
know, well, they all assume that we're all just going to be perfectly aware that if we continue to act as we are, we're going to destroy ourselves, and we're just going to keep acting that way without changing anything. That's what the models assume. The models basically assume that we're suicidal, and we're not.
No.
We're not at all. That's why we're concerned. That's why electric car technology is taking off. That's why, like, it's why clean coal is a thing. It's why solar. It's why China has the largest solar power infrastructure in the world. I mean, and China doesn't do anything. China doesn't do things for woke, stupid reasons. China only does things because they work.
Yeah.
Solar panel technology works. So, I mean, all of those models are incredibly pessimistic with no hope. They all assume that we're all just going to be addicted to our gas-guzzling SUVs forever.
Well,
and it's like, no, it's, Elon Musk has already shown us the way forward, which is that you don't, like, if you want to transition a society away from burning hydrocarbons for energy, you don't do it by negativity and legislation and at the tip of a government gun. You do it with capitalism, and you do it by getting people to willingly adopt this new technology by making the technology really awesome, which Teslas are.
Well, take a look. So again,
and that's hope. It's like, hey, don't think that a future without your big coal rolling, gas guzzling truck is gonna suck. Have you seen some of these Teslas? Because they're actually fucking cool. And by the way, you can still have your big gas guzzling truck. The idea would be that, like, human beings drive, like, in the future, human beings drive electric vehicles for work and for general transport. And then when you're doing fun shit, like going off-roading with your buddies or doing camping in the weekend, which is going to be in the future, you have your big gas-guzzling truck. But you're not using it every day to just drive to and from work. That's stupid. That's a waste of the truck, quite frankly. It's much better served by an electric vehicle.
Well,
so, I mean, but we don't have that
100 years ago.
Well, and see, that's something that kind of that ties into something I've talked about a few times, which is something that our current society is really lacking, which is a part of hope. I actually think it's intrinsically tied to it. In order to let's put it this way. In order to have hope, for most people, hope has to be paired with some kind of a plan. You can't just come up to somebody and say, hey, I know you're feeling bad about the future. Have you tried not? Yay, I helped. Like, no, that you have to give them something. The sketch of a frame, at least, some facts, some arguments, something to help them. Yeah, and so like for the environmental movement, something I've been saying for a while is that all the green initiatives, all the leftists are going about this the wrong way in terms of convincing the people who are opposed. They really don't understand the mentality of the people who are opposed. Because, by the way, most of the people who are opposed are people who spend more time in the outdoors and the wild, the environment, than most of these leftists. They're conservatives. They live out on farms. They hunt. They go fishing and hiking and camping way more than leftists. So the idea that conservatives are somehow not concerned with the environment is like, well, no, and if they aren't, they bloody well should be, because it's very much in conservative ideology to be about conserving the environment. Conservation. It just all goes together, right?
Well, a fly. I want to circle back.
So to put a tail on it. So what's missing is that positive vision / plan of the future. If we had that, I think the hope would naturally follow.
So, Fly, you had said in one of the podcasts that you were incarcerated for 6 years, and through that you got your degree. You've come out with your MBA. You're a published author. When you were without freedom, how did you sustain the hope of a better day? Was it because, at the end of 6 years I get out? Because you see people that generally, they go into jail, the recidivism rate is unbelievably high.
Well, let's not assume. Did you have hope in jail is the first question. Did you have it?
I had to have hope within. I had to have hope spiritually, mentally. I didn't get my MBA until I got out. I got my MBA 3 years ago. I got 2 associate degrees in the time that I was incarcerated. I got college trade and I wrote a book. But while I was incarcerated 5 years, 7 months, 2 weeks, almost 6 years. And it's not saying that, hey, you're going to do 6 years and get out. There wasn't a time frame. I had a 15-year sentence. I could have did the whole 15. That was 20 years ago at that time. You see what I'm saying? I had hope that each day was a hope that I make it to the next day. Mentally,
okay, so here's a question for you.
Physically healthy, yes, sir.
I don't know your experience, but I'm going to make an assumption here that I think is correct. There would have been plenty of people around you in jail that did not have hope, correct?
That's correct. Because
what differentiates? So talk about what differentiates you from them.
Well, what separated me from a regular person who's doing time or who's incarcerated?
Well, the ones who don't have hope.
Well, me myself, the institution had my body, but they never had my mind. They never had my spirit.
So cognitive and spiritual freedom.
Yes, they never had that. I always thought about what the things I was going to do when I'm physically free, because I was already free even though I was incarcerated. I was already free mentally.
There's a man named I think it was Eric. I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Stockdale. He was a wing commander in Vietnam, American fighter pilot. He was shot down and spent 5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. Was tortured. He broke, he was injured on crashing from being shot down, and his injuries were never seen to, and then he was tortured a bunch more and injured a bunch more. And he never told them anything. He never made a deal with them in any way, like John McCain did. He didn't even not to slam McCain, because, again, I don't want to say what I would have done if I was in there. But Stockdale didn't do that. Stockdale actually led like he developed a series of codes that he taught to the other Americans that he could communicate with, and like tapping through the walls and stuff like that. And he wrote a book about his confinement and torture for 5 years at the hands of the Viet Cong in their most infamous torture chamber. And he attributes, because of course the question is like, how did you keep it together so well? He was a very educated man. He had a degree in philosophy, and just obviously just smart guy. Had a lot of internal resources, and one of the observations that he made that I thought was I've always remembered, I've always thought was very interesting, a bit of obviously a generalization, but just what he noticed. He said that there's basically three types of men he saw in captivity, in those hellish conditions, and it was your uneducated, doesn't even have high school, shit kicker grunt.
Mm-hmm.
Your kind of like graduated high school and maybe a year or two of college, sort of middle manager type, and then you're more like what you would call a sophisticate, somebody like him who had a full education, higher IQ, that sort, and internal resources, that sort of thing. And of those, so he went through how well each of those three types handled this type of situation. And in his experience, he said most of the dumb guys, most of the grunts did pretty well. He said most of them just, name, rank, serial number, they stuck to that, they stayed out of trouble, and they didn't, like any attempts at coercion. No, you're the bad guys. I don't work with the bad guys. Period. The end. He said most of the dumb guys without education handled themselves quite well. He said the sophisticated guys like himself, in his experience, again, handled it very well. He said we handled it pretty much the best. We had the most internal resources. We were organizing the resistance. Most of us handled it very, very well. He said the ones who didn't were those middle ones. It was the ones who had a bit of education, but not enough. And so I've translated it in my life as like the ones who are a bit smarter than average, but not enough where they're actually like really sophisticated or anything like that. It's the ones who know a few things more and who think they're geniuses.
Right.
Yeah. So and he said that really they were the ones who would crumble, who would make deals,
for me,
who would read the propaganda,
For me, I used the system. I exploited the system the way they was exploiting me. So I exploited the system by looking at it like I was on a physical vacation. It's time to get my body right. It's time to get my mind right. I took advantage of the education, the Pell Grants. Got 2 associate degrees. I had time to write a book. I had time to get me right. And that's what I used that time to get David right.
Right. Your locus of control moved inwards.
So,
and here's the deal, Brian. I did 18 months. You do 18 months, you eligible for parole. So when I did my 18 months, I went up for parole. They gave me a 2-year setup, which means that you cannot go home 2 years. I do the 2-year setup. Now, when I come back up for the second time for parole, I had an associate degree, my first one, my associate of arts. I was working on my second associate degree. They give me another.
Well, and they like that, right? The parole board likes to see.
No, they saw that. I was on the trustee camp. I was on the best of all best being incarcerated. I wasn't behind bars. I was on a little land where no fences. That's where, the best of the best go. They call it trustee camp. The second time I see parole, they give me another 2-year set off. Like, fuck you. We don't care about your degree. We don't care about you getting a second degree. We don't care. They kept going back to, hey, you're in prison.
That seems a bit.
So after
were they just looking at your 15-year sentence and thinking like, well, we can't let him go so quick, or?
I don't know, man. The third time, I came up for parole. in my mind, I'm gonna read this excerpt in my book real quick. It said on Tuesday, November 13th, I saw parole again for the third time. I was not nervous. I didn't have anything to prove. I was already free, emancipated more than at any time in my life at that time of my existence. I had an appointment with the head lead voter of a 3-panel parole board in my case, Paul Kill, the parole commissioner. He really thought he had my fate in his hands, but I had already taken the power away from him. Checkmate. I own myself. I had my fucking fate in my hands. I was already free as I walked into the room. I entered the office without regard for what he thought about me.
They
That
must
time,
get a
man,
lot of like power hungry little
he asked me.
motos like that, huh?
He said, I talked to your family. This is the third time. I already had two-year set-offs, 4 years worth of set-offs. He said, I talked to your family yesterday, and they said they're ready for you to come home. I said, okay. He said, yeah, and and I'm looking at all the things you've done. He said, you about to get ready get a second degree. I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. He said, you're really doing good, David, and you're like a model inmate. I said, yes, sir. I said, let me tell you something, Mr. Kill. I said, by looking at my paperwork, I said, you gave me two-year set-offs. I said, I probably wouldn't let me go home either. He looked at me right in my eyes. I looked at him. I said, but looking at that paper, what the paper's showing you is not me. I know who I am. I said, so you can give me another 2-year set-off, a 3-year, a 4-year, or a 5-year. I said, I don't give a damn what you guys do. I said, because I know when you let me out, I will never be back ever again. I said, do you have any other questions? He said, no, sir. I said, can I leave? He said, yes, sir. Man, a month later, man, I was granted parole.
That's pretty much like Shawshank, where
and yes,
he finally gets parole, where he finally just goes in there and he's like, you know what, I don't give an F what you do anymore. Well, you know what?
Hold on.
They probably respect it just for being different, because I imagine, because they are really, they do have control of your fate in that context, and it must go to some of their heads. They must really get.
And I lost my mom. I lost my mom on the first year I saw when I did 18 months and saw the parole the first time. My mom died a week before I saw parole. So can you imagine the psychological things I was going through?
So I want to interject something, as this opens up an interesting conversation. Especially, I want to keep this with hope is a thing. Look at, and I know Jordan Peterson talks about the Gulag Archipelago a lot, and Solzhenitsyn.
That's similar to Stockdale. I'm putting a bunch of Stockdale quotes here, because of course Solzhenitsyn was in
Russian Gulag,
in a Gulag for years.
Yeah, long time, and he wrote a book. How did he get the book out? I don't recollect off the top of my head, but
he wrote 1914. I have a couple of Solzhenitsyn books on my shelf. They're typical Russian novels. They're very long and very wordy, but it's all there. I just like this quote. You might like this quote from Jim Stockdale. What was his book called? Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. So he just talks about how you need to be pragmatic and realistic about your limitations and about the system that you're currently in, which, like, in jail, you're just like, it sounds like it's exactly like you were. You're like, you've got my physical body. I'm not going to try and escape. That would be stupid. You'd kill me or whatever. That's not the way to handle this. But you don't own my soul. You don't own my head. You can't control my thoughts.
Yes.
Well, that's the thing. Is right, and this brings us back to where I would like the discussion to go.
Stoicism is very, Stockdale is a practicing Stoic, and one of his books is basically about Stoicism, reading the classics like the Enchiridion, and the Roman Army Field Handbook, which was given to all Roman soldiers, which had a bunch of Stoic philosophy in it. Like they actually, your average Roman grunt was familiar with some basic Stoic philosophy because it helped.
So there it goes back to that, bringing it to today, right? We've seen evidence over time that hope, even just a little bit, is one of the most powerful motivators in the world, right?
The
So,
election of Obama. I mean, I predict.
okay,
I'll just make my prediction true. The election of Obama. He literally ran on a campaign,
called hope.
hope and change.
Well, we
Yeah.
not necessarily the change he had was what we hoped for, but the
Well, yeah. There's a million jokes that follow, but
yeah,
point being that the slogan that
of
he
hope.
ran and won twice on was started with the word hope.
So,
Yeah.
but the interesting thing about today is, and it goes back to my initial question: how do we educate a generation that does not have even the sliver of hope that some of these like incarcerated men of the past, that Stockdale guy, Solzhenitsyn, Fly, who is a positive impact in his community, from a regular guy to war heroes, etc. That stoicism or that sliver of hope has to come from somewhere. So my question to both of you is, where? You can't just say inside, because that's like
Well,
ML
it's not
said.
answering the
So
question.
you have to
Yeah.
have. I mean,
You
you have
can't
to.
Because we're
just
talking
say
about
you.
like how do we change, like what changes do we put, like clearly society as it is now is not ideal.
No, it's not
It
very
can be
hopeful.
better, and
Yeah, I
and it's
probably go
lack
in.
of hope.
Yeah, go in this mindset. Expecting the worst but hoping the best type of mindset. That's the energy when you facing a disappointment and dealing with and having hope. You have to have the passion
There's
to
a
keep
deep
trying, keep
problem.
trying again, even when the results fall short. You have to keep trying, man. That's hope. Hope is not giving up. You have
But
to drive to press through the
hope isn't
up.
easy.
You have that
No.
is hope to me.
That was
You know.
something that I wrote down. Is that hope isn't easy. Like to hope as a, like cynicism and like being jaded and being cynical and
Quitting
being
is easy.
pessimistic. Yeah, well, and they're all, and they also, they don't expose you to risk. If you hope in, so say, um, like you have two people who have a sports team. They live in the same city, and their sports team that plays whatever sports is going for the championship of whatever, the big cup, right? Say, yeah, they got an NHL team. They're going for the Stanley Cup. They're in the finals, and the fan that feigns ambivalence and keeps themselves jaded and cynical and says, we've never won the cup. We're not going to win it this time. We blow it every year. Versus the fan who hopes and says, this is the year. We've got it. We've
Look
got
at the
the team.
Boston
We've got the
Yankees,
right
the
energy.
Boston Red
Now,
Sox.
the
100 years without
person,
winning.
yeah, exactly. So think
And then
of
they did.
that. So think of that hopeful person every single year of that 100 years without winning. Every single year, that hopeful person is exposing themselves to being disappointed, whereas the cynical person has already hedged their bets. They've already prepped themselves for a loss so that at least the loss makes them look smart
And feel
and
better.
makes the and feel better, and they can also point at the hopeful guy and say, haha, you're naive. See, that's why I didn't get my hopes up, because I'm a smart realist. So it's like a consolation prize. So I think that it then there's also, go way back, I mean, there's also humankind's strange fascination with death and with darkness and despair. um it's not going anywhere, and it's been there forever, so it has a pull all of its own as well. So yeah, hope is really, um that's why, as I've aged, like I was very cynical and very jaded and was in love with all of that kind of dark stuff in my teens and 20s. And then in my 30s and 40s, my contrarian nature really started to come out, and I noticed that everyone was like that, I started to become more positive and hopeful just as a contrarian reflex. But now I'm actually quite convinced, oh well, thank goodness I'm not, even if everyone suddenly becomes hopeful, I'm not going to go contrarian and go back to negative again, because I'm like, no, now that I've tried both sides for a few decades of my life, I've basically tried each side for like a quarter of my lifespan, which is a good chunk of experimental time. I've got to say, like like being positive and hopeful about the future it's way better. It's way better. I think the cynical people only focus on like, yeah, but what happens when you're disappointed? Doesn't that suck? And it's like, yeah, that moment sucks a bit, but then you know what happens? We get over it and life
So
moves on and there's another opportunity to win. Like I don't understand why you're just so fixated on it. Oh, and by the way, that's only the moment of resolution.
want to hear some
Most of
interesting?
our just let me finish this.
Oh, sorry.
Most of our moments are not the moment of resolution. Most of our moments are the work and the effort and the competition that leads to the resolution. And in all those moments, I'm happy and you're not, because I'm positive and I think that that this effort is for a victory, and you think that your effort is a waste of time and that you're just going through the motions to satisfy this naive optimist. So guess which one of us has like less ulcers, less stress, is going to live longer, and is just going to have a happier life? I'm pretty sure it's me.
So I want to bring something in here that's very interesting, and it's going to be a really big monkey in our wrench, as it were. Right?
Don't sell things. Just throw it in. Softball it in.
Softball. So okay. So this is a tweet on Twitter. It says, "So Target hired an artist activist in the trans Satanist movement." Okay, and hold on. This is the best part. This is a quote.
I guess that's a movement now.
Hold on. Listen. By Apapellin UK, Satan is hope, compassion, equality, and love. So naturally, Satan respects pronouns. He loves all LGBT plus people. I went with a variation of Bamafet for this design, a deity who themselves is a mixture of genders, beings, ideas, and existence. They reject non-binary stereotypes and expectations. Perfect. So, hope is such a powerful tool.
Win some conservatives over to the trans cause.
Hope is such a powerful tool that Satan lists it first on.
Those are the Satanists, to be clear.
Satan
those
is
are
hope.
Secular humanists of a very dark bent.
I love this. This is Satan is hope, and it's just
that's the Satanist. The Satanist
amazing.
Philosophy. Well, the Satanist philosophy has Satan as like they use Satan as the Miltonian Satan, as the anti-hero who is a humanist against a god that actually hates humankind. So Satan becomes this tragic anti-hero who sacrifices himself basically to try and he's like Al Pacino giving that speech in that movie The Devil's Advocate, where he talks about how Satan,
I'm the lover of
is
man.
The one.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I believe in man. I invest in man. Right. I nurture your every impulse. So that tweet, I think, is making reference to that conception of Satan. And of course, those Satanists are all atheists. They don't believe in the supernatural. They use it as a metaphor.
King James did write demonology. Also wrote, the King James version of the Bible. So.
Well, the original Satanists are like the Church of Satan was put together by a guy named Anton LaVey, who was literally a circus huckster. He was like one of those show guys at a circus. But he was quite the character.
But I didn't want to go down to the Satanist thing. It's more the aspect.
You read the tweet.
No, hold on. I just think it's very telling, and to the power of hope, that even if you present man's mortal enemy for the last 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian belief, right?
Mm.
If you put hope after his name and pastel colors and say that he's good, a group of people are gonna fucking believe it. That
Or
is,
it's like the word hope
but that's the
has enough positive connotation to override the negative connotation in the word Satan,
okay, but okay,
which has a lot of negative connotation in the
Yeah.
English language.
because they literally call everyone terrible. Satan.
Well, the leftists call everyone terrible Hitler, but you know.
Right, but you know, it's 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 interesting that the void of hope will open the potentiality for Satan to pick up that void of people lacking any potential future.
Well, and people are desperate for hope, and if you don't have like
Real hope.
desperate people desperate for something that's not being provided by genuine providers of that thing, who's going to provide it if not the genuine authentic providers? It's going to be charlatans and grifters and deceivers. So Satan.
Again, I just think it's a very interesting.
Well, that's the problem. It comes back to what I keep saying, which is that in the void of good, positive narrative, future like narratives of a future that our efforts and labors are building, if we don't have that, then we're going to fill that void with whatever the charlatans, grifters, whoever has an axe to grind. Like the big narrative for the future right now that certainly most leftists and Democrats, I think, have bought into is a future where we don't have a future. Like if humankind survives the next 50 years, it would be a miracle. I think that's the mindset.
Lack of hope.
Well, yeah, I can't think of a less hopeful pronouncement and vision of the future than we have 50 years left and then we're extinct. That's like some movie where our scientists come to us and say, like, there's going to be a massive
asteroid.
Yeah, there's a huge asteroid, or there's going to be a massive solar flare, or the poles are going to reverse, or Yellowstone's going to super volcano or something, and it's definitive, and we've got to get to Mars like now. I mean, the energy that they're inhabiting is the energy that you would inhabit in that scenario. But we're not in that scenario.
But we're being presented that.
Well, yeah, because of because of a couple climate models that are disputed. Like I don't get
So how does
the
this
confidence?
Again, it goes back to that question of how is hope being right? So if hope is
it's being hope is like what would you call hope? It's like an urge. It's like an urge and a drive and an energy, and you could call it a need too. I think people need to hope in something, and if there isn't something good provided by society and just ubiquitous that everyone is hoping for, and it's like, when this is a conversation that never ever ever would have happened in like 1943 or 1944. Because we all would have known, like, what's our hope? To defeat the Nazis. Are we going to do it? Yes.
Here's a question.
That's all we were thinking. And we were 100% dedicated to it.
Here's a question. Okay.
Now we're a bit lost. We don't have that same kind of when Hitler. Here's a weird props for Hitler. Hitler was such an existential threat to humanity that humanity got its shit together for 5 years, cooperated on one goal, and did it really well, which was, hey, get that Hitler guy under control. Let's get Germany back in its borders.
Here's an
interesting... Hitler brought out a lot of things that they're still technology-wise that they're still using today.
Well, that's common of war.
Well,
war produces a lot of inventions.
Propaganda, the way to use the TV, the Volkswagen. He brought...
Well,
the big lie was Goebbels, I think. Yeah.
Well, here's an interesting thing, right? And I was sitting there thinking about this while you guys were talking, and I think there's some amazing relationships to how Democrats want to trash America and want to say that we're bad and we were born of racism and we were born of slavers and we're not good people.
Hope
Because
for America.
hold on.
Let's talk about that.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
like that.
America represents hope. It's the land of the free. We've had 5 million people come here.
Opportunity.
Yes.
Opportunity
And that's
implies
hope.
hope. I mean,
And
yeah.
America being framed, right, by the left as bad, as we're not the hope, in that China's hope and they're the, we're literally being told that what has been true for the several hundred years that the United States has been in existence and the good that we've done and the bad. Don't get me wrong, the United States is not without sin, right? But there's always the hope that if you come here, you have opportunity, any more opportunity than anywhere else on the planet. Nobody is leaving the United States to run to China full steam for the hope
and when China
of more.
when China invades Taiwan, who are the Taiwanese hoping will save them? When Russia invades the Ukraine, who are the Ukrainians hoping will save them? It's the arsenal of democracy. It's America. Like,
And we represent hope.
well, and the leftists and the Democrats really don't seem to be willing in any sense. Like, they're perfectly able and willing to articulate at length America's faults and its flaws, which are legion, and its poor decisions that it's made on the world stage with regards to its usage of force sometimes. Sure. Okay, but they never, ever, that I hear, talk about all the times that America got it right.
Yeah.
They never talk about all the good that American foreign aid does. They never even talk, like, you bring up World War II and World War I, saving the world twice. And they'll just give you some spiel about how America managed to make a bit of money on it as well. And it's like, okay, so what? Does that mean they didn't save the world? No, I'm pretty sure they did. So, like, in both cases, they weren't actually involved in those wars, and America had fought a revolutionary war for this one of the specific purposes of not being in the Commonwealth anymore and not being dragged into the British Empire's wars, which, by the way, Canada was. So I mean, I don't know, like, they're just not willing to recognize that America can be a force for good in any sense, either to its own citizens or on the world stage with its foreign policy. All they ever see is the negative aspects of American foreign policy. They won't even acknowledge, for example, the fact that with that kind of power, like after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, America was the world's, it still really is, the world's only superpower. With that kind of power comes incredible responsibility and the capacity to do incredible harm when you make a mistake. And expecting perfection, expecting any individual or group of individuals to, even at the level of a nation state, to never make a mistake or an error is just not realistic. So, I mean, they're not even willing to cut America some slack simply for the fact of, like, it's so big. It's the only superpower. If Russia was the only superpower, do you think that the world would be a better place than the world where America was the only superpower? If China's the only superpower, do you think that leads to a better world than the one where America is the only superpower? Like, I don't think so. And I don't think any rational person would think that. It's just this demonization of America. It's like, it's well and good to be aware of your own faults. You don't, like, that there's this American exceptionalism thing can go a little bit far sometimes. The hoorah of the conservatives and America's #1 best country ever. It's like, okay, it's
so
number one in a lot of ways, but let's be like, Jesus talked a lot about humility.
Oh, yeah,
Let's
I
tone it
agree.
down. Let's take 20% off of it. But on the other side of the fence, like okay, if the conservatives are maybe a little too pro-American, all right, we can take 20% off of it. Now let's look at the Democrats. You call America the Great Satan. You guys talk about America with the same attitude and rhetoric that the Taliban does. So maybe you need
And all of them
like
are
this country that gives you the freedom to do that. Go to Turkey and try and talk about Erdogan that way. You'll be jailed immediately. And Turkey is one of the so-called success stories of the Western Muslim world.
Well, go ahead, Fly.
No, I was just listening. I'm just. It's true. Somewhat.
I did. Like it's one of the craziest things to me that these leftists shit all over America using technology invented in America on systems run by America, the internet, which America basically owns and invented for the world.
Well,
and they're like, America does nothing good. They're the great evil. As they sip their lattes on their
the
iPhones,
Starbucks that started in Seattle, yeah.
while taking a crap with their indoor plumbing. Like, there's still lots of places in the world that don't have indoor plumbing. Like, there's just a level of naivete where it's just like you really. One of the things, I swear to God, this puts me in a weird category, but mandatory military service, like possibly for both genders, certainly for men, I think is a really good idea. And to all those Democrats, all your northern socialist democracies that you love to point at, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, they all have mandatory South Korea, they all have mandatory military conscription for males at the age of 18, usually through 20 to 21. All of them.
And there's another one. There's a country that literally, when you're done basic, you take your fully automatic
That's Switzerland.
weapon home in your house so you can defend your home. I don't know of any like mass shootings in Switzerland. I don't know.
There's only been one. It was about 15 years ago, and I do believe they made some changes. I think now they don't keep their service weapon at home. I believe their service weapons are all in communal muster stations. So they're all their weapons are basically in a communal locker for like each of their individual towns that they can all get to within a couple of minutes. But I think they stopped it because there was one incident where a guy in Switzerland shot like a dozen people using his automatic service weapon. But like one incident in hundreds of years of practicing, like, to me, that's not a reason to discontinue it. That was that was one in a million. That was literally one in millions.
Right. So,
but even then, they just they didn't take it away completely. They were like, okay, well, you can't keep your gun in your home. You can keep your gun in a locker like a mile from your house.
Well,
you can still get it. You still have the key.
Well, the interesting thing, though, and bringing our topic back, when you talk about hope and you talk about potential hope, there's a give and take to hope, because you can have hope that's not founded in anything, that is delusion.
It needs to be paired with that realistic plan and vision, because otherwise it just turns
I can
this
hope
really stupid thing.
Yeah, it's like, I can hope I'm going to lose weight while eating Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
Or it's like the people who buy lottery tickets literally as their retirement plan.
Right.
And it's
it has
like,
to be something
now,
you believe in. That's true.
And it's like, technically there is a chance, but there is far more chance, orders of magnitude more chance of you getting hit by lightning or being eaten by a shark, regardless of where you live, than winning any lottery that is for over $1 million. So yeah, like hope that is untethered from
Reality.
reality in a
Right.
basic sense becomes, it can actually, ironically enough, it can become a force for evil, right? I mean, for example, so Weimar Germany, like the post World War One Germany being crushed by the Treaty of Versailles, was one of the, well, it still holds the record for the greatest inflation in human history. A time when, this is one of my favorite historical facts, a time when they were measuring currency by the weight of the notes. So, and they were approximating it. So a loaf of bread would go for roughly a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks. And it got to the point where in the city, buying tinder to burn in your fireplace was more expensive. You would get better burn time by burning the banknotes directly than by exchanging the banknotes for wood to burn. So this is one of the most hopeless from the perspective of the German people in the early to mid 30s. They were so beyond hope. Suicides, especially amongst the rich, were very high. The poor were starving. It was a destitute, desperate time. And into that void, and they had no, like, there was no path that they could see. They were in debt to
in
France
20 years
and the rest of the world, like they had no way to pay it off. And into that void stepped somebody with a message of hope,
Hitler,
and a better future for Germany, and it was Hitler. Yeah.
So,
and he had a vision, and it was compelling, and it had some probability to it because he executed a large part of it successfully, and that's, yeah. So hope, you want to have hope, there's a real power to it. And you want it, and it's always going to be there, and you need to have it channeled into something positive, because if it's not, it's going to find its way into something that's not positive.
Go ahead, Fly.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. Hitler, to me, he was like an evil mad genius to me. I don't agree with the tactics that, what he did things, but the guy, you have to give it. I mean, the guy he's beyond his time at that time.
There's nothing mysterious. One of the things that JP talks about this as well, and I learned this in psychology. One of the things that you understand very quickly about Hitler, if you look into his past and all that, not to try and sympathize him, but just to try and understand how this man came to be. Like, what was his genesis? What was his formation? What led to this person existing? And it's not at all surprising or mysterious when he was a decorated war hero in World War One, injured several times, believed greatly in Germany, was hopelessly thrown into despair by Germany's loss and the crushingness of the Versailles Treaty. He found that to be just very dishonorable. That was the feeling was, and actually there were many amongst the British who actually felt the Versailles Treaty was overly harsh and was kicking a downed opponent, which was still seen as, back then they still had that conception of honor, and it was seen as being a bit much. And I think history has kind of borne them out to be accurate. I think the Versailles Treaty was too much. It set the table for Hitler perfectly. So,
let's move forward, and I'm going to bring Afghanistan, where we left. We were the hope of those people. We left, and understand, we were there for 20 years, so there were women who have never been under Sharia law.
Yeah.
Now have all of their
educations.
All of their hope has been evaporated, gone. And in the void is not necessarily a good thing. So there's a instance.
It's what's left when good leaves.
Yeah.
When good leaves, whatever else is there, which is not good,
It's
the
despair.
Taliban's not good,
It's
but
despair.
they're there. The Taliban isn't despair either. They're just, I don't know, they're...
Ask some of the 18-year-old women who now are being sold off into, you know, basically slavery. As
Well,
their-
it's all arranged marriages, right? But
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. I
I
can't
mean,
even imagine that.
they don't have
you
a lot
imagine
of rights.
prior to the bumbling fool's exit of Afghanistan, you're an 18-year-old girl, you started your first semester in college, and now you have to wear a face covering. You are not allowed to leave your house in public without a male escort. And oh, by the way, we're going to sell you to this person here as his wife, and you are no longer permitted to do anything without his permission.
And you're not continuing your education. You're
No.
not going to.
You're
work
not going to
any kind
have
of
a
job.
future. So,
Well, you'll have a
There's
future,
no hope.
but
We say there's
it's
no hope in that
determined
individual.
for you.
right. So that bodes the question, okay, is an individual like that man, what do they find hope in?
Well, it depends. I mean,
That wasn't
if
necessarily
they've
an answerable
known-
question.
yeah, right. If they've known the freedoms of the West already,
They're gonna
like you say,
escape.
if they've grown up for 20 years without Sharia law, I don't think there's any way for them to go back. If you've never known anything but Sharia law, then
Korea.
it's a total. Well, no, I mean, any woman living in any of the Islamic countries is subject to Sharia. So, but most of the women that I'm aware of in those countries actually approve of Sharia law, but they've never known anything different. So it's and there is, like, if you talk to, like, the West's conception of how Islamic men relate to their wives, as far as I can tell, is completely fictional. It has nothing to do with the reality of how Islamic men and their wives treat each other and how they view their relationship to each other.
That's
'Cause
true.
all
I
the
agree with that.
all the times I've heard Islamic men talk about women, like the place of women in society and in Sharia law and their wives, they don't talk about them as slaves.
Oh, no.
It's the exact opposite.
Oh, their job
It-
is to
it
make
remind
people.
me-
Yes, that's propaganda. I was when I was incarcerated. I was in the religion of Islam for from incarceration.
What, you were like
I guess
practicing, or you
within
were
15
studying
years. I know the Quran. I read the Quran over 10 times, the whole book.
in Arabic, right?
And I can read in Arabic as well. And it also says that the woman, your wife, is one half of your religion, and they take their religion pretty serious. So
Well, that's the other thing. They take their religion way more serious. They're way more
serious.
devout and pious than your average religious
they have this
American.
thing called
They
things that-
everything good that happens, the first thing any Muslim does is
Thank
God.
Allah. Yep.
Yes.
Immediately.
Alhamdulillah. They say alhamdulillah. Yes, all praises. to
Yeah,
Allah.
and what does the future hold? Inshallah, whatever God wills.
Inshallah. Yeah.
I mean,
inshallah.
it's just.
So
I love that
Yes.
phrase.
So
Inshallah.
God,
I love
God
that.
be it. So God be it. Inshallah.
That's right. It's just because it's
Inshallah,
also
mashallah.
it's like a stoic thing too. It's like, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I'll deal with it.
Yes. But God always come first, what their perception of what Allah.
Yeah,
which
so,
means
like,
their
if
God,
you're-
God always come first. Nothing comes before
Always.
God. They walk in the the whole meaning. their whole
Everything you
life is
do
God.
is for God.
First. It's called taqwa, in the presence of God. So,
right. So that's interesting, right? Because
So the women brought up in those cultures that know nothing different do not in any way, as far as I can tell, see their position within that culture as being oppressed, as being
Yeah.
lesser, as being any kind of slavery. That is not how they see it. And if they've never experienced anything other than that, then
they're happy.
yeah, it's just that's it, right? Like it's difficult for us in the West, I think, particularly for Western women, to try to imagine that they've never had the experience of being a Western woman. Like this is your, like, in the way I've heard women describe like the burqa, for example, who like it, they describe it as like their holy garments, and it is their protection. It is their way of preserving themselves for their husband, who they love above all others. And they know, like, Islam is actually quite, what would you say, realistic, I would say, about the lusts and desires of men. Like, Islam is very upfront about it, and that's why they cover their women.
They
they're
remove.
They're basically like men are pigs.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we're going to remove the potentiality of you lusting after my wife, right?
Because it's disrespectful to the woman, and it's shameful for yourself as a man to
like.
do
There's
it.
no
OnlyFans,
like
and you're disrespecting her.
Right. So I'm gonna bring.
Well, that's why you don't take pictures, right? Like, there are people, like, some people have asked, like UFC fans, you know, when Khabib Nurmagomedov became champion and did his reign, and of course he's deeply Islamic, from where is it, Uzbekistan, and white Muslim, but there's millions of white Muslims that are just as Muslim as any Arabic, like and have been Muslims for hundreds of years, and you know, and his wife is never seen, and people have asked, like, why aren't there pictures of her? And I heard a black fella, MMA fighter who trains with Khabib and is friends with him, who visited Khabib's land and stayed with him for all that, where Khabib is like a god, and he understands Islam pretty well. And he said, you know, in Islam, you don't even ask about, like, you don't ask about the women. You certainly don't take pictures of them. It's so disrespectful. Like, that's not, like, men's gaze. The male, it's almost like Islam is like weirdly feminist in that they understand the power of the male gaze. Like, in feminism, they talk a lot about the male gaze, and Islam really understands the male gaze. That's why they don't have their women in bikinis, because they're like, are you kidding me?
Right.
But here's,
you know, in prison they call that the female guards. They say, hey, don't be eye fucking me.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So,
yeah, because it's the eyes, man. It starts with the eyes.
So the interesting thing about this, right, and I'm gonna bring us back on the topic and close us up because we're over an hour at this point. And I'm gonna say something that would probably go contrary to what most people would think I'd say, is that one of the things Islam does really well is they recognize the fact that a woman's main function and how God made her, whether it be God, Allah, Buddha, to make better people. Her job in the society in the Muslim society is to tend to the education, well-being, and upbringing of their children, and to tend to the support of their mate in whatever endeavor that person is. So they really hardwire the idea that it takes a husband and a wife to raise a family. They hardwire the idea that, you know, infidelity is very, very bad. They hardwire to the point of extremism the commandments, as it were. Whereas in the Western society, we look at everything as a suggestion. This is a good suggestion to do this. Whereas in Islam,
we've gotten a bit decadent. Yeah,
it's not a suggestion. You're gonna cover your wife, and she's not gonna do this, and that's not gonna happen.
And like, your wife shouldn't. You know, I don't think that there's some phase that Muslim young women go through where they want to show off their bodies a bit, and then like their mothers cover them and educate them, and they're beaten up a little bit. I don't think that ever happens. I think by the time they start to develop secondary sex characteristics, they're so fully
invested
that they're totally invested in that system, so they understand what's about to happen, and they want to, like, the last thing I think
they want to be a good wife.
Well, the last thing a Muslim girl would want to do would be to tempt a man with her body. Like, that's really not good.
the reason, especially in Islam, we go back to the subject at hand about hope. A person that's in that deen, they call it deen or that religion of Islam. Their hope is to be in God's favor. Period.
They're a
Period.
works. They're called a works-based religion,
They want to be in
and
the favor of God. That's their hope. Their whole total entire lives to be in
yeah.
favor of God.
Well, organized religion in general, not just Islam, organized religion in general, it like gives hope in uh, in a package that has everything that you kind of need to exercise it in a systematic way going forward in your life. Like it, each of the major world religions is giving you kind of a template. It's saying, to the great question of how do I, like, what is life for, and how do I live a good life? Each religion, in its own way, is giving you answers to those questions and is giving you a blueprint and saying, well, if you like, here's what you need to believe, here's how you need to act, and if you do these things, here is the result that you can expect. So it's a plan for the future. It's a very positive plan, of course. If you do everything right, you get to be in the presence of God, you get to go to heaven, you get to be reincarnated, whatever
There's
it's
hope.
some cessation of death.
Yeah.
It's always, each religion in its own way, always like the big hopeful answer to the big negative question of what happens after I die. Each religion, of course, has a hopeful answer. There's no religion I'm aware of where everything you're trying to hope for is your own negation. I'm not aware. Oh, I guess nirvana is supposed to be is that the Hindus? But you have to work through that. You have to be reincarnated a bunch. So
So,
yeah, most religions are about hope. I mean, I don't think a religion that didn't harness a religion that doesn't harness hope, I think, is probably a non sequitur. I don't think definitionally it would even function.
so I'm gonna close this on this, and I'll get each of you guys to answer a question, and I'll start with ML Fly. Then I'm gonna finish off. So here's my question to you: if hope is the future, and hope has power, for you personally, what is your hope for the rest of this year?
Well, the future is going to happen regardless. So, hope is like the time sadly has an arrow. It's not simultaneous. Entropy points the way. So the future is going to march on regardless of whether we hope or not. And to me, that's actually an invocation for hope. It's going to happen regardless or not, regardless of whether you hope or you despair. If you spend all night excited about your future and in a positive, happy state, or all night agitated and anxious, neither state has done anything to prevent the future from occurring. It's going to occur. So you might as well, at that point, you just realize that really the choice is simply one of, do I want to be happy or do I want to be miserable? Because either way, the future is going to happen. So you might as well just be happy. So for me, in terms of what I hope for the next year, I hope I get a better job, and I hope I continue. I hope that the momentum I've built in my life continues to, go in the upwards direction rather than the downwards direction. And I have a whole bunch of plans on how to make that happen, so it doesn't at all feel like an unrealistic hope, which is good, because I think if you're hoping something and then you suddenly start to doubt whether or not the hope is at all plausible, I think then, yeah, you're going to get into a situation where, yeah, you might be in a bit of trouble. But as long as as long as your hope is congruent with your reason, I think as a default position, you should be hopeful rather than cynical. And I think that is not, it's so, it seems naive, some kind of cockeyed optimism, pie in the sky. But to everyone who thinks that, who counts themselves some kind of high IQ rationalist, I would say you need to think more about it. think it through, because I did, and there's no logical, rational reason, as far as I can tell, to be ultimately and defaultly pessimistic about a future that's going to happen regardless of how you feel, anyways. And it's also a little bit of like, if you're if the future is also a great deal what we make it. And if we go into a project thinking at the outset, well, if you have two teams, I'll end on this, and if you have two teams, say we split humanity into two teams, team optimistic and hopeful, and team pessimistic and just full of despair.
Hopeless.
And yeah, team hopeless, thank you. And we set the same project before both of them, and it's a great project, and it'll take all of them working together, and it'll take a lot to do. Which team is going to affect the better product? Which team is going to have a better outcome in terms of how that project works out, without knowing anything else about the teams, only knowing that one is optimistic about the project working out, one is hopeful, and one is pessimistic and hopeless? Well, our science, as in our actual neuroscience, as well as our psychology, as well as our common sense, it's always great when these all agree. All of these things tell us that the team with the positive hope, that the team with hope is going to have a better outcome. So you should just hope. It's just better.
All right, Fly. Your answer the same question. What do you hope for this year?
Well, I hope to continue to evolve all facets of my being, and pretty much like ML. I have some things I have lined up for the future to grow on all facets, man. Financially, mentally, spiritually, and I hope I hope that Fed now don't come in. No, I'm joking. Fed now don't just take over our life. But anyway, yeah, I just hope for the best in the humanity, man. Especially with the things I've been seeing. I see they really are pushing to try to take automatic guns away from us. There's a lot of control things going on. People not cognizant of. It's right before our faces. And I hope that humanity, man, keep growing, keep awakening to what's going on with the bullshit of the elites, man. That's me.
Okay, so I will answer the same
Team
question.
Team people.
Team people.
I talked with somebody yesterday on Discord, a hardcore leftist homeless guy who is schizophrenic and off his meds, so your standard Democrat, and he honestly, in his soul, hates human beings and himself for being human, and he identifies as a non-human. And I was just like, and asked me if that guy had hope. No,
Wow.
he just had delusion.
So
it was pretty sad.
That's pretty sad.
my hope is that at the end of this year, I would have affected people in a positive manner, in which that what we're doing here has encouraged people to think about how they approach the world and think about what they can do to be a better person, and to consider that hope is the prerequisite to any success, because it is. If you don't believe that you're going to win, you're not going to. We talk about that in boxing, and we talk about that in any combat sport. If a guy goes in thinking he's going to lose, that he has no hope of winning, that he's definitely
Same thing in a
gonna lose.
negotiation. If you go into negotiation thinking this is pointless, we're never going to agree on
You
anything,
never will.
then you're never going to agree on anything. Yeah.
So,
Sure.
gentlemen, I leave you with the hope that you have a great next week. And I think next week we'll have the rest of our panel back, and we'll start. I was thinking about a topic the other day that might be interesting, because we always hear people talk about the truth, and I think it's an interesting word, the truth.
We're like in I keep hearing we're in a post-truth society. And I'm like, yeah, we should probably talk about that.
So I definitely think the truth has so many places it could go, especially in the context of people don't like to tell the truth. They don't like to hear the truth. You know, the truth is bad. You hear all these things about the truth, but I would like to examine what the truth really is and have it picked apart the way we take apart things, which I think is a unique presentation because all of us approach all of the topics with the idea of expanding what we think about it. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to think about the truth. So consider the truth over the next week. And
Got it, man. That'd be a good one.
I
That would
think
be
it
a
will
good
be
one.
too.